And I'll count us down.
Yeah.
So we'll go in three, two, one. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Jeff Rick here, coming to you from the home studio for another episode of Work 20XX. And I'm excited for this next episode. This gentleman, he's been in the space for a while. He started kind of a transformative company serendipitously right at the beginning of 2020. And he's living it. You know, he's living the values. He's really kind of changing the world. And he's joining us today all the way from Cyprus in the Eastern Mediterranean. He's Tony Jamous. He's the CEO and co-founder of Oyster. Tony, great to see you.
Good to be here, Jeff. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So we had the good pleasure of meeting a little while ago, and I just found your story fascinating. You also are a great sharer. You've got open source ethos, so people can really find out. There's no secrets here. This is not a secret. But before we get into it, let's just jump into Oyster 101 for people that aren't familiar with Oyster. What's it all about?
Yeah, so Oyster is a global employment platform. We help companies anywhere to employ people in any country without the need of setting up entities, hiring lawyers, accountants, payroll providers. We do all of that through the power of software. And why we do that? Because we want to make global hiring as easy as local hiring so we can reverse brain drain so people can stay in their home countries, don't have to leave their family, their community, but access to these amazing job opportunities that the world can offer.
So we hear a lot about, remote workers, and we hear about some of these cool travel visas that some countries are putting in place to try to attract workers and have them come work from there. But, there's all this ugliness in terms of taxes and regulation. And traditionally, before Oyster, if I wanted to set up some type of entity to employ somebody someplace, you had to have kind of some type of a structure. So how have you solved that with software? Do people work for Oyster technically? Do you have some type of, because I know out here in Silicon Valley, there's TriNet. So everyone who's ever worked for a startup in Silicon Valley has worked for TriNet, which they, kind of orchestrate the details until the company gets old enough to kind of do their own HR. Is that what you're doing? Explain, how does it actually work?
Yeah, it's actually pretty much like China, but on a planetary level. So let me tell you a bit of history. The US is composed of a number of states, and each state operates like its own country when it comes to labor laws. So there was an emergence of these players in the US called PEOs, professional employment organizations, that would employ the person on your behalf in that state. And so we took that concept and we made it global. So we built a global employment infrastructure in 180 countries. We have legal entities, we have payroll providers, we have benefit providers in each of these countries. And then on top, we build a software platform that is increasingly AI driven that federates all these knowledge of compliance, of tax regulations, can generate contract, can assign benefits to an employee, can process the payroll, can process the payment, all through the online platform and a few clicks. So if you found Mary in Athens, you want to hire her, she's a great software developer, you can do that in 24 hours, and you can offer her a great employment contract. You can pay her fairly. You can even offer her equity if you want.
Interesting. And you've got people, I mean, you kind of you're living your mission. So you've got people distributed all over the world. So do you have, I don't know if points of presence, what's the word to use, in all those countries as Oyster? That's really kind of your key secret sauce.
Yeah, so we ourselves use our own technology. When I wanted to start Oyster, one of my drivers is how can I build a hyper diverse and a hyper distributed organization on this planet? And I couldn't find a technology to support me in that, so I went and built it. So we use it internally. We are distributed in 70 countries. We have no offices. We are nearly 600 people. We are gender equal across the board. So imagine the amount of diversity you have from people living in 70 countries, gender equal from over 100 nationality, are coming together to build the software platform that is driving equality in the world.
That's great. And then you've got kind of the aggregated market data. So if I don't know how much to pay Mary from Athens, because I've never hired anyone from Athens, you've got, kind of like we've seen in a lot of the housing and some of these other like Zillow, where suddenly now you've got this aggregate information to show kind of what is the market and how the market is defined to help me figure that out.
Absolutely. We tell you what is fair pay for her, depending on her role, on her seniority, and you know the first data for compensation is somehow available in the developed world. Think about the North America and some places in Europe, but it's not available in the rest of the world. And also the other challenge we have is that remote workers ask for higher salaries when they work for a company overseas, when they work locally. Think about software developers. Software developers are in high demand in the world. So we have developed this compensation insight tool that enable companies to estimate what is a fair compensation for anyone anywhere in the world. And they can use the same tool to design their compensation philosophy to make sure they can create equality across the system, because humans are very sensitive to feeling of fairness. And when you're in one country, that's easy. When you're in 50 countries, that's harder to achieve. So our tool enables you to create that sense of equality and fairness across the world.
How have you seen the evolution of pay for skill versus pay for geo when traditional geo borders are breaking down? How do you see that evolving? Because that's a big issue, right? Because there's huge market differentiation for skills in different geos.
Absolutely. And look, I have absolute belief that there's one day in the future where that difference will go away between different geographies. It's going to probably take us 10 years to get there, but we are making incremental progress toward that. So roles that are in high demand, talk about the software developers, the gap between a software developer in an emerging economy and a software developer in the West has been shrinking fast in the last few years. And we see that happening in other roles, knowledge worker roles that are also increasingly in demand. Think about sales executive, think about accountant, marketers. So all of these are team members we employ on our platform on behalf of our customers. And so there's still a gap today in the world, obviously, still inequality, but the good news is that that gap is shrinking. And with platform like Oyster, by making it more possible for companies to tap into the world as a talent pool, we can have a shot in creating more equilibrium between the supply and demand of labor.
Curious to get your take too on kind of, and you've got a much more global point of view. Think of like 1099s and W-2s in the US, and it's such a small kind of slice of definition of the working relationship between the company and the person. But then you see the rise of the gig economy. You see, these people driving Ubers and Lyfts and driving, Amazon delivery services that are actually not Amazon. It's a different wholly owned independent company that worked for them. How do you see kind of the evolution of the relationships between the company or whoever's paying and workers with things like Fiverr, with things like fractional CMOs? It just seems like there needs to be a lot more granularity and variability in the way those relationships are defined, which of course then ties back to taxes and it gets more complicated on the back end.
Yeah, look, Jeff, what was happening and what's still happening is that full-time employment has been a bit traumatic for people because it restricts your freedom. It's less flexible. You have to go to an office, you have to commute, you have to be in meetings all day long. So when you work for companies that are not well structured to make people successful no matter what they are, and if you work for companies that restrict your freedom by imposing some unnecessary restrictions, such as working in a specific place or commuting to an office, or then people are choosing to actually quit a full-time employment job and become a contractor, and not being subject necessarily to a company's policy. They would be working on specific projects instead.
Right.
And multiple clients. So we've seen that trend happening. But also there are companies that are doing the opposite. There are companies that are giving that flexibility to their employees. They're investing in their growth and development, creating a culture that are inclusive and safe and fair. These companies are thriving and attracting the best talent in the world, because the best talent want to be part of a team, right? They want to create something meaningful together. And in many countries, a full-time employee relationship cannot be done through a contractor model from a regulation standpoint. There would be a tax misclassification issue that companies face if they employ employees as contractors. So this is where also our platform can help. We have a lot of customers that come to us saying, I have these 20 contractors distributed in 5 countries. It's time for me to make it compliant, and we want to move them to full-time employee. And this is where Oyster can come in. We also support contractor model as well. So we process a lot of payment for the gig economy. So in short, I think the key is to create cultures that supports people's growth and give them the freedom and flexibility they need, so that full-time work is not seen as a tax on people, but is seen as a way to support their life.
We'll get into your management philosophy, and I know it's interesting, your sustainable leadership. But before we get there, from company's perspective, it just feels like there's a trend over time to move more things right from the balance sheet to the income statement, to move less things from capital expenditures to more flexible expenditures based on demand, et cetera, whether it's cloud computing or whatever. So do you, and also I would argue that kind of the contract that my grandfather signed up when he went to work for AT&T for 30 years and got, lifetime health benefits till he was 100, that's all kind of gone away, a lot of the employee match. And I don't know if you've seen the same thing in Europe and some of the other geos, but it seems like the fundamental contract between what I'm giving you and what I'm getting, and maybe I'm suffering a little bit more of that short-term pain because there's some long-term benefits once I retire and healthcare for life. I think part of that's gated here in the US because of healthcare, and it's still tied to employment. It's not disconnected, which I think would open up a lot of flexibility. So do you just see this kind of ongoing cadence in terms of flexible staffing, either around a project, around an initiative, around a whatever, so I bring talent in around an objective, versus and taking more of what would have been full-time, W-2 hires back in the day?
Yeah, I think when it comes to labor flexibility, it's really in countries where the US, where employment is at will, it doesn't really make a difference if you employ somebody as FTE or as a contractor. It makes a difference in countries where there's no employment at will, like in France, where if you let go someone, it's a very complicated and a risky process. So in countries like that, you tend to default a lot to service providers and outsourcers. And actually the IT outsourcing industry in France is huge. It's one of the top industries in the country. Why? Because the employment market is so rigid, you cannot hire and fire people easily. So that companies, before deciding to hire somebody full-time, they default to an outsourced company. In the US, it's much more flexible labor. So we see no impact there. But you're right. If you're working on a specific project that is contained in time and is well defined, then putting together a team of contractor could be also an interesting idea.
Yeah, that's great. And congrats to you, 3 years, and I think you just had a nice raise not too long ago and hit $1 billion valuation. So, congratulations to you and the team on that.
Thank you.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about kind of the global opportunity. And you talk about it a lot in podcast appearances, this huge mismatch between supply and demand, especially in Western countries, developed countries. You could take a position like, security engineers or whatever. There's thousands and thousands of unfulfilled jobs. At the same time, there's a lot of people that aren't within 20 miles of an office that might be qualified. I wonder if you could share some of the macro trends that got you excited to go in this space in the first place, and what are you seeing now 3 years into it?
Yeah, when I started working on Oyster, I started looking in late 2019. I started looking at these macro trends. First, there was remote work, and we looked at remote work, and it was clear that remote work was the future of work. The pandemic enabled that to happen much faster. Now you have also, I looked at the employment data. There are 80 million jobs going unfulfilled in the West, according to Korn Ferry, resulting in $8.5 trillion of economic loss, roughly 10% of the world economy. While at the same time, you have over 1 billion knowledge worker coming into the workforce in the next 10 years, mostly from emerging economies. And there was this economist called Brian Kaplan from George Mason University. He wrote a book called Open Borders. It's a very nice book. It's like a comic book written by an economist. And um, he argues in his book that if you remove the concept of border from planet mobility, you have the opportunity to triple the world economy. So it's anything between 10% of the world economy to 3 times the world economy, the potential impact of unlocking global talent. And knowing how the capitalistic system works, I don't see any future where there's not going to be a supply-demand equilibrium. What was missing was removing the friction in front of companies in the West to employ people in mass in other countries. And Oyster is a component of that, is an answer of that, because we streamline, we make global hiring as easy as local hiring, a few clicks online.
Yeah, and bring it down. I mean, I'm curious within your customer base, how many smaller companies? Because before you couldn't do it if you were small. You had to set up that regional center, and maybe you could be in 1 or 2 or 3 countries, but you couldn't pull from all around the world, and you certainly couldn't pull 1 or 2 individuals from a specific country. So I'm curious, your kind of customer distribution, how many of them are small companies? How many are big companies? There's this flow to, getting people outside your borders.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. So before having platforms like Oyster, only big companies had access to global talent, right? They had to think about Google. Google would have offices in 50 countries, and they would go and hire the best talent in these 50 countries. But if you're a small startup, you cannot compete with Google on hiring these people, the best talent. So now our customers are SMB and mid-market companies. So they are between 1 to 5,000 employees. That's like 95% of our customer base. Because we give them a secret weapon. We give them Oyster to enable them to compete as well, if not better, than the Googles of the world in the war on talent. And we have a customer that has 200 team members on the platform distributed in 50 countries.
Wow. 200 people in 50 countries, so no more than 4 in a country on average. And I think you said you're the only Oyster employee on Cyprus, correct?
Yes, there's nobody here.
I love it. You grew up in Lebanon during the Civil War, and you left to go to France for your education. And you had an interesting quote in one of your podcasts that you were a guest. You said, "I built businesses to protect myself." And you were very successful. You built a couple businesses, you sold them, they went public, and you made some money. And then you weren't happy. You did the Silicon Valley dream. You opened the startup, you went public, got acquired, you made some money. Here you are, and then you weren't happy. And the other great line that I heard is one of your friends said, Tony, what would it take for you to start another company? And now you get to approach it from a very different perspective, from protecting yourself. Now you have an opportunity to take your learnings and make some changes in the world. So I wonder if you can share the reflection of that journey at the beginning and some of these things that really impacted this unique thing that you've built in Oyster. That's really kind of an operational platform, if you will. Your great line, sustainable leadership. Which is tightly knit, but somewhat, I don't want to say removed, but it's a different layer of intentionality than just trying to fulfill supply and demand within your customer base.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. Oyster is a laboratory for me to experiment in these, I would say, human-centric leadership tools or techniques, because I want to work in an environment that works for me. I want to feel safe. I don't want to have fear of being judged. I want to be myself. I want to be super creative. I want to feel fulfilled. I want to work on something meaningful. So all of this, I want to surround myself with diversity. So this is the environment I've imagined. And also I imagine an environment where I can live wherever I want to live. I want the freedom of location, the freedom of time. I want to work when I want to work. And that led me to start Oyster. But before getting to starting Oyster, I was um, I was doing a lot of inner work. So I took some time off. I took a year and a half off between starting my first company and starting Oyster. And during that year, although I had made a financial success, I felt there was something missing in my life. My relationship were not great. The way I take care of myself was not great. So I went on this inner work journey, essentially therapy, intense therapy process that enabled me to realize that, well, it enabled me to realize what I need to do to heal myself, to get better, to feel healthier, and be happier. And one of the component of that is to work on something meaningful and purposeful. And that led me to start Oyster because I felt that if I can create, if I can put my efforts into making people feel they don't have to leave their home countries and go through the challenges that immigrants go through to succeed in the West, then I could feel more purposeful. I could feel more fulfilled. I could be happier, and so that's kind of what led me to start Oyster. And yeah,
Well, there's a couple kind of philosophical anchors that I want you to expand on a little bit. And one is the role of courage and fear. And you talked about, living with courage and fear and learning to kind of master those two words. How do you address courage and fear, and how do you get on top of fear? Because fear is it's a big motivator, and it can drive a lot of crazy behaviors.
totally. And for me, so since I was a young child, I have developed a higher sensitivity to fear. And why? Because I was in this war zone environment for the first 10 years of my life. And so some people call this PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I had to deal with it later in my life and heal from it. And what I realized is that it's not sensitivity to fear, it's just sensitivity. I have more sensitivity, and instead of running away from what I'm feeling, these difficult emotions such as fear, I learn how to be present with them. And that's what courage is with fear. Having courage is to not running away from your fear, is still have the fear, but not act on it, is to become non-reactive to fear. And a very concrete example of application for leaders in my position is, well, in my position, you're always faced with very scary challenges that could derail the company. But you cannot go and react to that, because if you react to that, you propagate in the organization unnecessary fear, unnecessary anxiety that would lead to the wrong decision. So you have to manage yourself. You have to lead yourself. You have to sustain yourself. This is where the sustainable leadership concept came from. You have to be there for yourself as a leader to process these emotions so that you don't go and snap at your team, create behavior that generates fear in the system. Then you start losing the emotional safety that you need to thrive in an environment. And then you become having toxic cultures, right? So managing fear is an important skill for leaders.
It's funny. We talk a lot about psychological safety. We talk a lot about, creating environments for people to take risks so that they will take risks, so that they'll innovate, right? But also by taking risks, some percentage of those will fail. And there's this kind of moment of truth on the exchange of information from someone talking to you receiving it and how you respond. You talk about non-reactive more than any leader I've ever heard of. So it's this, we see in Amazon, I think one of their special skills is bias for action. And before they respond, they try to think of a way to say yes. Is there a way I can say yes without saying no from a leadership perspective? But you've kind of more generalized it into this non-reactive, and it's really interesting at that point of potential friction, or that point of really, really where the culture rubber meets the road, because how are you going to react to whatever I did, said, or am reporting? How do you get ahead of that? How conscious is that? You take a deep breath, you try to get the bad news and the reaction over before you get on the call with the person, because you're very intentional with that. And I think it's a really powerful behavior that people can try to adopt that isn't that hard technically, but is a really beneficial thing in terms of building that trust and relationship with the person on the other side that just took a risk and told you something that maybe wasn't always great.
Yeah, there's an inner work that you can do, and there's outer environment work that you can also do. Let's talk about the inner work. The inner work is about developing higher sense of sensitivity to how you're feeling, and and then uh, and then non-react to them. Essentially, develop this ability to make choices based on these emotions and not be on autopilot. So people do meditation, people do breathing, people work with plants. So there's a number of techniques. Therapy. There's a new therapy that I used recently called acceptance and commitment therapy that enable you to accept whatever you're experiencing and committing to do differently this time or not do anything if you don't have to do anything, right? So this kind of non-reactivity is a skill that you can learn. And secondly, the outer world, you can also organize your outer world so that you're not always on, that you have a downtime to process before going into a meeting. And asynchronous work that is very common in remote companies is an amazing type of work to minimize this reactivity, because before going into a meeting, I've already processed the data. If I have a bad news, I got that bad news yesterday and I have a meeting tomorrow about it, right? So I'm not like having the bad news in the meeting in real time, right? So that helps a lot in reducing reactivity in the workplace. And yeah, I think these are the components. So there's an inner work you can do to develop your ability to be non-reactive and not run away from what you're feeling and be more aware. And then secondly is really organize your environment so that you reduce the amount of triggers that are here to trigger you.
You are also very outspoken in your management of your own time. And the management of the things that interrupt you. And it shocks me that too many organizations are still kind of dopamine running, chasing notifications, which often are triggers, and not really leveraging, well, as you said, one of the beauties of async is that you get so much more time to actually turn off notifications and get work done. I'm just curious how that's been reflected within the company and how it was so different than, potentially the last couple of organizations that you were involved with in terms of giving people time to get work done and specific, kind of active instruction to turn notifications off during some certain period of time so that you are getting the actual work done that we're paying you to do instead of just replying to email all day long.
I mean, look, this company now I work for, Oyster. I feel 2 times more productive than my previous companies, and not a but, and I feel more relaxed and fulfilled in my life, right? So this is the effect of adopting a purposeful way of working designed for distributed and remote companies. And so why I'm more productive? So to give you an example, I instead of sitting in meetings all day long, I watch recorded videos, right? And instead of the meeting I have to do takes 4 hours, it takes 1 hour because I've already processed on my own many of that meeting component. And why I feel like more fulfilled and more relaxed, because I work where I want to work, right? I don't work in the morning. I work in the afternoon and the evening. And at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, I spend 2 hours with my kids. And on Friday, I don't have internal meetings. So Friday, I use it for, we call it Focus Friday. Everybody in the company has a Focus Friday where we don't have internal meetings. And we use that time to catch up on everything we need to catch up on during the week so we can go on the weekend and close our laptop and shut down our Slack, right? So the next morning when we come back to work, we are refreshed and energized. So this is how we do it. And actually, like, I do this like this because we have to protect ourselves from the negative effect of work. Work can be amazing. Work helps us to grow, work together, build connection, build relationships, solve important problems in the world. But also work can be taxing on us. So how can we keep the good things of work and protect ourselves from the negative things?
Love it. Along that line, one of the things you like to say is success is about minimization. and consuming less. And if you think of that in the context of work, and you think of it in the context of, all these notification platforms where you're getting Slack and email and text and Lord knows how other many digital work platforms that people are using, really this focus on minimalization, really, which could also probably be described as radical prioritization, and really eliminating the stuff that's not important and really focusing on the stuff that's important. Oh, by the way, you just get these huge productivity gains. I love to hear too some of the feedback from some of the folks on the team to suddenly get an opportunity to work when it makes sense for them. If I'm just not in the mood, go take a walk. This async and digital tooling really opens up a whole different world of a relationship between you and work.
Absolutely. Not to mention that you can also choose where you want to live. Right? I mean, many people don't have that option today. They have to live in cities. I mean, if you like to live in cities, it's great, but many people are forced to live in places that are not designed for human living, right? So there's high level of pollution, there's time wasted in transportation, and there's expensive real estate. I mean, there's really giving people the choice to be distributed on the planet and live where they want to live, not only has a massive impact on people's happiness in this world because they can choose where they want to live, but also has an impact on our environmental footprint. We are pouring 4 times the equivalent of New York City in terms of concrete every year on this planet to build more urban centers, more urban areas. And we know that's not sustainable. So we have to find a way to continue to grow the economy because we live in the system of infinite growth requirement, yet do it in a way that is healthier for the planet and for its people.
Right. And you've got all these little towns, right, that are getting hollowed out because the opportunities weren't there. So the young kids have to move, and you get this kind of downward spiral of a lot of places that aren't crowded and don't have commutes, where, if you can run a fiber or you can run a fat pipe to that community, suddenly there's an opportunity for people not to have to move to take advantage of the opportunities, to actually be able to stay and contribute back in their local community, but, take advantage of this global kind of economic boom that we're in.
Exactly.
So one of your other kind of great philosophical points is kind of thinking in terms of the mind versus the heart. And, I think if you use feeling and thinking of people as people, they're not pieces of steel or a piece of concrete or a car, as they used to think of them, and as an asset. It's really people. And you talk quite frequently about, letting people know you care. And in that, you're going to get, this tremendous amount of marginal effort, intrinsic motivation, pulling harder on the oars, all these things that come from treating people like people versus treating people like an asset. I wonder if you can share, kind of where does that come from and how you're using that on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it's like I've developed this, I call them energetic systems. And there's an energetic system I call the eagle, and another one called the condor. And I try to use different ones in different situations. So let me tell you what each one is. So the eagle is my flight and fight system, is my system that deals with crisis, with risks, and so if I'm, let's say, I need to raise money for the company, I put my eagle energy on, and it's fight and flight system, and I focus and I get it done. And so, but the condor, why I call it the eagle, because the eagle is a predator. The eagle kills to eat. The condor, on the other side, is a scavenger. She or he take care of the environment to survive, right? And so he is much more nurturing. The condor has one child every 2 years. The eagle has 4 per year. So the condor, when I'm dealing with something, with an issue internally that is people related, I put my condor energy system, and I'm more listening. I'm more compassionate. I'm more caring, because I'm dealing with a human system here. I'm not dealing with goals and market issues and whatever requires me to be this eagle, right? So being able to choose what energy system I want to use in each situation has helped me a lot in the last few years to actually grow my leadership style and actually don't get stuck in any style, right? So I can be much more flexible. I call it having ego flexibility to really adapt to the situation.
I love that. Right, because average doesn't work anymore, right? Everything's context sensitive. You gotta have the right context. So you're a
Yes.
deep thinking guy, and I want to ask you a couple of questions on some philosophical issues. I had Martin Mikos on. I don't know if you know Martin. He used to be the CEO at MySQL. He's the CEO of HackerOne. Similar kind of a deal, actually. He connects companies with independent hackers. But we were talking
Mm.
about learning. And he said, we all want to learn. We all have to learn. We have to keep learning. And it's great to have a fun learning environment and we all grow together. But he goes, but when you touch the stove, you learn really fast. And that's when you realize that there's kind of different levels of learning. There's learning, and then there's touch the stove learning. As a leader, you need to get people in situations sometimes where maybe they accidentally touch the stove. You don't want to burn themselves, but at the same time, those are the lessons that really sink in. How do you think about helping people learn in this context? Because we all need to keep learning. The world is changing so quickly. The tools are
Mm.
quickly changing. But there's this kind of interesting paradox where there's learning and then there's, touching the stove learning.
Yeah, great question. So how I do this is essentially by empowering them and giving them room so that they can make small mistakes that are not deadly mistakes or can be reversible, and give them the permission to do so by being non-reactive to their mistakes, right? And the second piece is to model the way, is to do that myself and share the learning from my mistakes, right? I want to make making mistakes something actually allowed or possible and part of that journey to learn, because uh, you can hire an amazing executive with an amazing track record, but the situation they're dealing with is completely different. So they have to learn on the job. Like learning is a really important part of the process. And you want to create an environment where people know that they know that I'm not hiring you because of what you know, I'm hiring you because your ability to continue to learn.
Mm-hmm. That's great. It's like the parenting paradox. And you mentioned you've got kids, I've got kids, and I tell young parents I think this is the ultimate parenting paradox, because you want the kid to learn, but in helping them learn, sometimes you're hurting their learning. So I always think of like teaching the kid to ride a two-wheel bike. At some point you have to let go of the seat, and they're probably going to fall over. But in falling over, maybe they learn to ride the bike better. At the same time, you don't want to push them over and scrape their knees. So this constant, trying to help versus holding back, trying to help versus holding back, so that they can learn on their own and cross those places that they wouldn't have done. And you can't help them do that. They have to do that on their own. I think it's a real challenge.
Yeah, it's a great example. Actually, this is the way you create safety for people to learn is very similar to how I taught my son to learn a bike. Actually, there was a whole loan. So it was like all safe to fall first. And I hidden all the things that could hurt him and he could fall and be okay. So this is very similar to work environment. You create an environment where failing is safe. How can you make failing safe?
You get hurt, not injured is always
Hurt, not injured.
hurt, not injured, recoverable. So last thing is we're getting towards the end of our time. Impact of AI, and you deal with a lot of independent contractors and people that are all around the world, and I can't help but think of the people that worked at Fiverr as kind of a different version of what you were trying to do around some very specific services. But AI changes everything. How are you using it internally? But also, how do you see AI changing the demands within this kind of global talent market? Because some things are going to get subsumed, but other things are going to be new, different, and drive different kinds of demand.
I think AI, what's going to happen is going to shift the expectation of what employers have from the value employees will be delivering in the future. So we're going to expect more value to be produced by each human being by using AI to augment the capability of a human being. It's also going to be very, very fulfilling for people to use AI, because suddenly you have this amazing technology that is supporting you to make more impactful things. So when, before we used to do run numbers on a piece of paper, and then you had Excel. Imagine how much accountant, like it was nirvana for accountant, right? It became so much fulfilled that like the expert in all these macros and Excel spreadsheet formulas. And so we're gonna have a similar impact here. People is going to be more fulfilled, and they're gonna do more things with the help of technology. So yeah, so I believe that is going to make work more valuable for businesses and make people more fulfilled using this new technology. Now, how we're using it at Oyster, we have internally, increasingly people are adopting AI across the board. Whether you are a customer support representative or the CEO of the company, we all use a form of AI assistant. We are also developing our own AI technology. So we were the first to launch our AI chatbot last year, where you can chat with our platform and get answer as a customer about employing somebody in France or about compensation in a specific country. So we had a technology that enabled us to make our customer experience better, but also scale much more effectively our operations, because now instead of having humans to answer these questions, now we have a machine that does that for us.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we're getting to the end of our time. I want to give you the last word as we head into, I don't know if it's even appropriate to bring up with you, Return to Office 5.0, which I brought up with Brian Elliott the other day. Here in the States, it kind of goes with back to school and Labor Day. You're obviously well past that. As you look forward into the next year, as well as, you've got a good view on exponential curves in technology. You are down in the guts in the network and telco world. How do you see the next couple of years kind of playing out? What are you excited about? If we talk a year from now, what are we going to be talking about?
I'm very excited about closing the opportunity gap between North and South. We have increased our percentage of team member in emerging economy from 30% to 40% in the last 2 years, and sent hundreds of millions of dollars in foreign direct investment into emerging economies. And we're just getting started. I'd like to see that number continue to go up. And so yeah, what I'm excited about is make employment global by default. So companies can look at the world as their oyster when they're looking for talent.
Love it. Well, I'm sure what's going to happen is you're going to have these up and comings that start bumping off incumbents. And I think ultimately it's going to be the financial markets that start to say, hey, what are you doing? You got to adjust with the new time. Well, Tony, it's great to catch up. Love all your work. Listen to a lot of podcasts getting ready for this. And I really appreciate the mission and really breaking down barriers between opportunities and people to fulfill those opportunities. It's a win-win all the way around.
Thank you for having me, Jeff.
All right. He's Tony. I'm Jeff. You're watching Work 20XX. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening on the podcast. Take care. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again.